Welcome back to another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and on today's episode, I interview James Jones, an inspiring gentleman who is running for the lieutenant governorship in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. What is up, podcast land? Welcome to another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. On today's episode, man, you guys are going to love this guy, James Jones. I cannot wait to share his story. An amazing human being who's lived a life of service to his country in so many different forms. I'm really excited to share his story. But before we do that, I'd like to tell everybody where they can hear the podcast. Pretty much anywhere audio podcasts are listened to: iTunes, Pandora, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you listen. That's where you can listen to 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. All I ask is that you hit the automatic download button and subscribe. YouTube, you can find all the videos from the episodes on YouTube, which is under my name, Matt Cubbler. So please go there and hit the subscribe button and the automatic little bell dingy thing for notifications. I'd appreciate that. If you want to learn more about me personally, you can go to mattcubbler.com. And that's where you can learn more about my life story as a police officer and a veteran, and growing up with my brother Andy. I wrote this book called A Brother's Love, a Memoir 16 years ago, 15 years ago, almost 16 years ago. And still going strong today. It's my memoir about my brother Andy and my life. My brother Andy was autistic and had a severe stutter, and sadly was killed in a car accident in 1989. And it's basically a tribute to my brother and the historical perspective of our life together, and a way for people who've never met him to get to know him through my eyes. So if you want to get a copy of A Brother's Love, a Memoir, please go to mattcubbler.com or anywhere books are sold online. All right, I think that's about all of the business that we got to take care of. Now we will get a chance to meet my man James. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing just fine, Matt. Thank you so much for the invitation this morning.
Well, we met at an event probably 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. And when we spoke, it was an instant understanding of who you were. First of all, we had the same barber. So,
That's right.
God only makes so many perfect heads. The rest he puts hair on.
Amen, brother.
So, but I just felt this initial attraction to you as far as just someone who I want to be around. And you have this aura of confidence and aura of authenticity. And that's a very rare thing in the line of work that you're in, or at least in the one you're trying to pursue. I think probably your business life, authenticity has served you well. But in the political realm, it's not necessarily a common thread that many share in that world. And I think having people who are authentic and have a lifetime of experiences like you do is going to serve you well when it comes to being a leader in the political realm. So you're a Bucks County guy, or are you in Montgomery County?
I'm kind of on the borderline. I'm a Bucks County guy, which is right there on the borderline of Montgomery County and Bucks County, which is right in the heart of Hatboro, Pennsylvania.
Well, I'm in the Limerick area, and I know the climate politically in my area, and I also know the political climate both in the state of Pennsylvania and nationally. I just got to ask you, why? Why politics? Why do you want to be? And if people who are listening, over his shoulder is a picture of him and his running. It's basically his promotional material for running for lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. And very few men can rock a bow tie, but my friend, you do.
Thank you.
But why politics? Why is that something you're drawn to?
I am a person of service. I came from a service background. My family were sharecroppers. Today, they call them entrepreneurs, but we come from a background of the Jones family. My grandpa was a deacon. He was a preacher, pastor, Southern Baptist pastor. My dad was a deacon in his church. And, we just simply had a desire for community service. My grandpa owned a farm, or sharecropped a farm, but most importantly, he had a one-room schoolhouse that educated wide variety, wide ages of kids inside the local community. And my grandpa, Terry Jones, was a guy who hired people to come in and to teach classes at the one-room schoolhouse. So, you know, the question about service and why I decided to run for office, it goes back even further than just early this year when I received a telephone call from a gentleman by the name of Patrick Cubbler, who had spoken with my pastor at my church. My church is Calvary Chapel of Philadelphia. From Miami, throwing that little plug in. But I love my church, been there with them for about 15 years. And Joe Fosh is the leader. He's a great pastor. You know, I'm praying for him all the time. And one of his junior pastors, or another senior pastor, Jerry Paradise, contacted me and said that someone from the Conservative Party was looking for a person to run for political office. I had no aspirations to run this year. I've ran for Congress before in 2010 and again in 2016. It was something that was in me to do because I saw the world changing. And I'm one of those guys, I can't just sit on the sideline and watch the world change around me. Again, it goes back to my upbringing. My grandpa Terry says, hey, look, you guys got to feed your face. The only way you're going to do that, you got to get out and make a difference. If you don't like what's going on, and I was born and raised in Arkansas, so that was a time where Jim Crow was very prominent. If you wanted to see changes come about, you didn't sit around and maul in your beer, if you will. You get up and you do something about it. So what happened to me then? I joined the Navy. My brother, and similar to your story, you have a beautiful story about your brother and how he died in the accident. I can relate to that quite well because I had a brother who died about 3 years ago of cancer. And he and I were the best of friends. There could never be another person greater than my brother other than Jesus Christ, you know, in terms of having that level of honor and respect for him. I even joined the service because of him. The Navy was a place that he showed me that there was a greater world outside of Arkansas. And I said, you know what? I've got to be with my bigger brother. He and I were always tight growing up. And I joined the service, so it wasn't like being around strangers. I was with my brother. We did time in Vietnam, lots of time on the shores of San Diego, Long Beach, California. We enjoyed that time together. And then he finally decided that he would return back to Arkansas shortly after my dad had died and spent time there helping my family. But I stayed in the service. I finished the tour duty. Went through 3 wars, Vietnam, Beirut, First Gulf War. And I ended up feeling that service to country is what we the people do. You don't sit around, you watch other countries go through a timeshare of misery. You do something about it. And that's the way it's been in my DNA for years and years and years. If you want to see change brought about, you do something about it. If you're going to complain about it, then just complain. But best person to complain to is Jesus. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a Christian, but I'm a firm believer that if you're going to make change, it has to start with one person. That person was me. I have a philosophy, Matt, that says, I hope to die shamed unless I've contributed something to mankind. And I believe that with my family, my children, I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. So everybody understands that they have a responsibility to give back to our society. We, the people, must be able to live up to our duties and responsibilities. So honestly, when you ask the question, Matt, that's why I decided to run for political office. I'm a person who wants to see change come about. We've had a miserable last few months. You know, in 2020 was a tough time going through a pandemic. We saw an election that I think was very much compromised by some of the systems that were in place. And I realized that we have some key people who are trying to make a change to see something come about as a result of that election. And I think it was a debacle. I don't think Pennsylvania handled it quite well. We have Act 77 that allowed mail-in votes without any real type of quality control. And I know you understand the chain of custody, especially being a police officer. You cannot just simply allow anybody to just make a vote without having any type of traceability on that vote. And we had an election that was tossed into the air and into the hands of a president right now that's making life miserable for all of us. So if we're going to stop that tragic socialist, Marxist behavior that's taking place in Washington, we have to draw a ring around Pennsylvania. And I'm a part of those people who stick this finger in the sand and draw that ring around it to make a difference so that I can be able to help the people of Pennsylvania show that we have a voice. It's time for us to shine. And that's why I decided that I would go out there. I prayed about it, and I'm going to run for lieutenant governor.
First of all, God bless you, man. I always ask the same question, everybody, and we're not going to do it now because, quite frankly, I don't know if you could add any more depth to the "Who is James Jones" question than what you just gave. Because what I heard, and this is why I love that when I do this type, why I ask that type of question as a police officer, I either am dealing with criminals or victims. Like those are the two people I'm dealing with, and in order to get information out, or in order to get them to open up and share with me, whether I'm trying to get them to admit to a crime or open up and talk about something that happened to them, you have to get broad questions because it sort of helps you understand where their brain's at and help turn their brain into the direction that you're trying to get them to think in. So what I heard from you, and I almost would give the very same answer on many levels, is when anybody asks me who Matt Cubbler is, I say I'm a servant.
Mhm.
In every aspect of my life, I serve. I serve my wife. I serve my children. I serve my God. I serve my community. I serve my country. I serve my mom and dad. And like I'm a servant to the world, and that's just the way I was born and raised. That's what I was brought here to be, and that's who you are. You're a servant. And when the beautiful part about being a servant that people don't necessarily understand, because sometimes that word can be negatively construed, like as if you're subservient.
Right.
But it's not. It's the highest gift you can have is the ability to serve. And when you have a servant's mindset, you can't be a victim. You can't allow yourself to simply wallow in whatever is happening in your world and just let it be. You've got to be a man of action to serve. And what I'm hearing from you is that when you identified a moment where your calling was to serve again, it was because action was required. You got a phone call and you identified a problem and you saw how you and your skill set and the things that you've done in your career could be used servingly to solve that problem. And I commend you for that ability to continually, because clearly this is not a new phenomenon for you, to continually answer the call to serve.
That's right. And Matt, that's a great question too. When you ask, who is James Jones? Because James Jones has a composite of many different attributes that made me into who I am. Again, upbringing was very critically important. At the Jones house, it was not a multiple choice question whether you were going to go to church or serve God or not. That was mandatory. And throughout my life, I've had that same notion that when I was married, I taught my children and my family that the only way we can all be successful for our personal accountability is to have Christ in our life as our personal Lord and Savior. That is the role model that I would rather use in any person that I've ever known on the face of this earth. Even though I love my brother a lot, he's not Christ. And I believe in following Christ in every aspect of my life. From a political standpoint, I look at a Frederick Douglass conservative model that helped me to be able to identify with why I need to be in this particular political arena right now. Yes, I am pretty much a bulwark. I'm a statesman. I believe in, you're going to say something, mean what you say and say what you mean. Frederick Douglass was that kind of a guy. I like looking at some of the attributes he delivered for our country. Frederick Douglass believed in the three boxes: the jury box, the ballot box, and the cartridge box. And he also talked about the soap box, where occasionally you have to get out there and get your messaging brought across. But I thought the jury box meant that we have to have a judiciary that's not dictated by the whims of each moment. We have to have a Supreme Court that understands the laws and not just by the political standards, and that they are creating politics. They're creating new legislation. We have to have a good system of voting. Our integrity of voting right now, it's really, really bad. With this mail-in ballots with Act 77, it caused so much disarray for Pennsylvanians that it's now we're looking at having to recall Act 77 and make new amendments to it because it was done haphazardly by people who were not even connected with the legislator. For example, the attorney general, the governor, the state Supreme Court. Their fingers should not have been involved with Act 77. but they're in there, and we have to be able to fix that. We have to have some stalwarts. So you have to have some bulwarks. We have to have statesmen who doesn't mind coming out of the trenches and going into the battlefield to fight once again. Not a fist fight, but I'm talking about a fight for the people, the rights of people who put their trust into legislators, who put their trust into this government to make sure that we were treated properly and fairly in the course of an election. The last thing, the cartridge box. I'm a 2A person. The Second Amendment is something that I wouldn't compromise for anyway. I believe that having the right to bear arms is the Constitution was framed by some of the most genius people of all times. Even though they had no idea what they were doing that would impact the rest of the United States of America for years and years and years to come, for generations to come, they put it together pretty smartly. The Second Amendment is something that was put there for the right reason, so that we could have that right to bear arms and not ever allow the government to take control over our lives. We have a right to be able to protect our families. We have a right to see the proper people in place who are being protected. You guys, as police officer, I support the blue wholeheartedly. And when you got people who are speaking of defunding the police, it's ridiculous even to have that word to fly out of your mouth, because we don't have enough patriots. We don't have enough community leaders who can do what you guys are properly trained to do to protect us. Whenever something takes place in the neighborhood, for example, 9/11 happened. You saw people running away from those two fallen buildings in New York City. The police was running to the fight, not away from it. And that is something that I firmly believe, that we have to have good, strong police. We have to have a Second Amendment. We have to have people who are willing to go to the last piece, the soapbox, and stand up and fight for all Americans, all Pennsylvanians, to fight for people who cannot fight for themselves, to protect those who are unable to protect themselves. And that's why I believe that Frederick Douglass was a kind of a guy who wanted to stand out. He wanted to be a warrior. He tried to sign up for the Civil War, but he was too old at that time. And so his voice was best used to help inspire President Abraham Lincoln to do the right thing, to help get slaves freed so that free men could understand the Emancipation Proclamation. And what we're looking at also is on June the 19th, they call Juneteenth Day, is a grand celebration for when Black folks were set free, the actual date when it was set free. But that's a holiday that, you know, I think we all need to look at and appreciate, not just some day that we're going to have a day off, but it's a day of celebrating, just like the 4th of July is a day of celebration. 1776 marks the time in our lives where our American lives. We have to stand strong and we have to defend what our forefathers stood for. It's not about some new narrative that's coming up and that folks think that, you know, we can just change our Constitution. It doesn't work that way. The Constitution is solid, it's firm, it's fixed, and it's not malleable. It is not changeable. And that's why I'm running, Matt. I'm running to fight to make sure that we have people who understand, as a constitutional republic, we stand for it. And I stand for it. And I'll stand now, I'll stand then, and I'll stand until I go home to see Jesus. That's what I'm here to do.
I just got chills. That I wish and I thank God we're doing this podcast. I grew up in Pottstown. I grew up in poverty. Single mom, worked 3 jobs since I was 9 months old. My dad left. She remarried when I was 12 to a pastor. So I'm a preacher's kid. But I grew up in a very urban environment. And as a police officer, there's always been this sort of like, I'm sort of taboo in my own hometown because I grew up in an urban environment, many Black neighbors, lived in projects. I was the only white kid on my block. Then I became a cop, and it's like this, now I'm on the enemy side. Right now I'm no longer the same kid that they grew up with, when I've never changed. Who I am, and anybody who's honest, who knows me will know that I'm literally the same person since I was 7 today at 50. There needs to be more conservative people of color in our government. And it's almost like you're a taboo in your own community as a Black man who's a constitutional republic conservative because it's like the anomaly, right? It's hard to for people that I grew up with to rectify who I am as a police officer and what I've done for my career. And I'm sure there is some consternation amongst the Black community as you being a Black conservative. But I honestly do believe this, and I spoke to Kathy Barnett when she was running for Senate. I had her on the show because I think her story is very similar to yours in that she came from down south and made her way into somehow becoming a conservative throughout the entire, that wasn't necessarily the chosen path for most people growing up in the South, especially where she grew up in Alabama. How is it with you being a conservative and being Black? How do you massage that to the Black community so that they understand why and how you got to where you are?
And Matt, you raised such a great question about that, because I think that being a Black conservative is something that it's in our DNA. As a Christian, we were born into believing that, there are certain unalienable rights that were given, God-given rights to us. But I think over the years, we have seen the influence of the left-wing party who have influenced people for making false promises of hope and change, and that never materialized. So what happens when they see someone as myself, who is a constitutional conservative, a Frederick Douglass conservative, who believe in God, who supports our First Amendment? I think we have to have free speech. We have to have free access to religion. Nobody is trying to say that you can't be anything other than what you want to pursue in America from a Christian standpoint, from a religious standpoint. We have to be able to identify with that. But I think what has happened is that over the years, we've seen a lot of Black people who've lost their moral compass. And I say that, and I say it well, because if you are a Christian, how can you not believe in life and not, an option to life? As a Christian, Christ died for our sins. I mean, he wanted to live, but he said in his last, breath, if it's your will, my Father, then I go. But if you stop and look at every single person that is aborted, look at what could have very easily happened with Mary, Jesus' mother, the instrument that God used to bring him onto this earth. Had she realized that, wait a minute, what will people say about me? That I am not married to Joseph, but I am impregnated with a child, and nobody understands this holy birth syndrome here that we're trying to promote. Nobody would understand that. So life is, who can take life? We are not able to recompense that. God is the only one. He's the creator of it all. And I say that because a loss of moral compass is that historically we've seen a lot of politicians go into office and they've created policies, laws that protected that right for people to go out and have as many abortions as they want to have. And at some point, is 5 abortions enough for one woman? Is 10 abortions enough for one woman? At what point do you stop and say that's too many abortions for one person? And now we also have a government that says we want to make sure that we allow that as a part of a healthcare, that the government pays for it. And it's unfortunate that we have people who even think like that, yet they call themselves to be a Christian, and that, or a Catholic, or whatever you want to say. But I think what has happened is that we got to go back to the basics, Matt. We got to go back to the basics that we believe we have to love one another. I don't care what you look like. We got to learn to love one another. We got to learn to respect one another. We have to learn to live with one another. And we've got issues right now that I know Christians should not endorse, this critical race theory. That goes completely against what God teaches in the Bible. It goes completely against saying that white people are all evil and Black people are all good, or Black people are all evil and white people are all good. Listen, I can go back into the Old Testament where Joseph, if you stop and think for one moment, he was thrown into a pit and then later pulled out of the pit and sold into slavery by his own family because they were jealous of him when he told the story about the dreams which he had had. Okay. But God used Joseph. He went to prison, got accused of trying to, when he was released, got accused of trying to have an affair with Potiphar's wife. He got thrown back into prison again. He comes out again. And later on, he becomes the governor who set a lot of people free. Set a lot of people free. But I'm saying that because only God knows how we can be shaped when we're going through certain situations. And I think that we've lost our moral compass. We need to be able to stop and worship God once again and pray for direction. We have to have something other that's greater than ourselves that's going to help us bring back to the nucleus of a narrative that supports everybody. When I hear people say that climate change is our worst enemy, I just go, how in the world can you say that? How can you say that? When we have so many different people who are doing things and saying things and causing laws to be created that are hurting all of us. All of us. It hurts our families. We're looking at families being torn apart. We have more single mothers than we have married people right now in America. I think it's like it used to be a 55% of divorce rate in America. I think it's moved up to about 80% right now. And unfortunately, I happen to be one of those people too. I've been divorced before. My most recent wife, she died, and God rest her soul. I know that she would be very proud of what I'm doing right now, running for office, running for lieutenant governor. My children will be very proud of me. My grandson have already said, Grandpa Jones, I want to come be with you when you go to your inauguration. And I love that because they know what I stand for. They know what's in my heart. And they know how hard I will fight to see change come about. I believe that we have a nation that is on a pivotal point of change, but we have to have good agents of change, someone that has that willingness to step forward. We had a president in office. Whether a lot of folks liked him or not or disagreed with his politics, but he said what he meant. He made promises on the campaign trail and he lived up to it. I think that's very honorable when you have a person who can say, I will reduce unemployment in the Black and brown communities. He did that. He said, I would change the North America Free Trade Agreement so that it is fair trade with America. He did that. He came up with the new one, the Mexico, Canada, and the USA agreement. Our President Trump did that. He said he was going to move Jerusalem. He was going to move the embassy in Israel to where it should be in Jerusalem. He did that. And those are just 3 items. I think it's important that we recognize we have had examples in place where we knew that this guy, man, was sent by God. He was kind of like a modern day Joseph, if you will. But who's to say right now who's going to be the best and who's going to be the worst president? I can say what we're going through right now, we definitely have to pray for our leadership. Okay? We have to pray for our leaders because I think, my own personal opinion, we're going in a very bad direction. We got our borders open and exposed. And from what I understand most recently from some of the news outlets, there are like 56 different nations countries that had people coming in through that open border in the southern area of the United States. We've got over 1 million immigrants that have come through that southern border since they stopped building the wall, and that we're allowing people to come through ad nauseum without any restriction. They're putting the immigrants up, especially some of the little children, and my heart goes out to them. Especially not very long ago, I saw where there was a little child that was out there on a block of rock crying because they had no one there to care for them. Probably the kid was maybe 5 years old. And you can't help but to have passion, compassion for someone when they going through that. Maybe their situation where they're coming from is bad, but by the same token, there's a process in place that we've lived with at least for the last 4 years, and it was working pretty good. But now we have to be able to change the dynamics of what's happening on our borders and how we need to look at housing these people and stop wasting money, putting them in nice hotels, immigrants, putting them in nice hotels and causing our National Guards to sleep on the floor in the parking lot at Washington, D.C. Something is wrong with that picture, Matt.
There's so many things wrong with our country right now. But what I always do is I always find I am an agent of change, but an agent also of understanding how to find success. And I find hope in people who I know have the capability and the ability to go out and affect change. You know, you've been in the Navy, you did a long tour in the Navy, you served in 3 wars. I'm a veteran of the Gulf War as well. I think one of the things that, you know, I always try to figure out, how do we get to where we are? Like, what is our life's journey? How did we get to here? Whatever here is, whatever point in time in life here is. I think part of your ability to be so clear in your focus and understanding of the world is the fact you've seen it. And I have conversations with leaders in the Black community who have never left the Pottstown. And I'm trying to express to them that this isn't about, for me at least, about black and white. This is about good versus evil. This is about light versus darkness. This is about God versus Satan. This is about saving America, which is, whether you are an agreeer like we are that the Constitution is the second greatest document ever written outside of the Bible. The reality is that in comparison to the world, if you don't have a view of that, you're only taking whatever someone's telling you. You and I have seen the world. We've stopped in places where the world is not nearly, on the worst day in America is sometimes the best day in other countries. And when I try to explain that to people, they then argue with this. They don't care about what's going on in other places. They only care about what has happened here. And I try to explain to people, and I want you to touch on this if you can, the amazing success that was the idea of America that has been now going on 245 years, the things that have been accomplished in such a short window of opportunity. The firsts that were accomplished in the world happened here. And there is not a single place on planet Earth, I've been to 49 countries, I can tell you there is not a place on planet Earth that can hold the jockstrap of the worst person in America. And when you look at it in its totality and in comparison, no matter how many things that have gone wrong in America, how many mistakes we've made along the way, how many atrocities that have occurred at our own hands, it is still the beacon of hope for every other person living on planet Earth that is not an American. And the fact that we Americans do not appreciate that is a byproduct of many things. Number one, I believe we're all born pure. We're all born with no love, no hate, no heart, just love. And everything that from the first breath on is influenced by family, friends, culture, society, on both sides. We need to do a better job. As you said, going back to the keeping it simple, going back to the roots of our nation, which is Christianity, leading with love and teaching our children that we're all the same and that we are all able and capable in God's eyes. And that is where we're at this sticking point of rehashing old injuries instead of accepting the fact that even if we were to solve all those problems, we're still here today. Where we are today is where we are. And it has zero impact on the changing of the past, only on the movement towards the future. And I love when I see someone like you who has seen the world, who has a vantage point that is broader than most people's. And when you speak on something, you speak from firsthand experience, not on something that someone told you or shared with you or something you read in a book or saw on a TV show. What is your perspective? Let me shift that. What would you tell anyone who is stuck in this perpetual hamster wheel of rehashing the past, on the value of doing that versus the value of understanding the global, larger scale view of America in comparison to the world, and how moving forward, we can be still the greatest idea ever created in the history of mankind?
I think we the people, and I consistently go back to that point because I believe that the Constitution was designed around fairness and equity. Yes, you're right. 245 years ago is a great deal to try to rehash something that none of us can really answer. We can't deal with reparations, but all we can do is have a better understanding of love and how we can be able to work better together. And you talked about the fierce need for freedom and going to other countries. I just had a reflash as you were discussing, Matt. In 1975, I brought out the last boat people when I was aboard a ship temporarily called the USS Denver, LPD 9. We went into Da Nang. It was a hostile situation. It was a time where the Viet Cong had taken over the country. And we had an opportunity to help so many people, thousands of people, to escape to freedom. People came with little knapsacks with their life savings in those knapsacks. Some had passports, some had records, birth records, some had pictures. We had one general who came with a helicopter, and we had to push it off the side of the ship because we had to have more room for people to come on board and be on deck. It was a very touching time when you see all these mothers, fathers, children that were unaccompanied coming on board the ship. And for the first time, getting a chance to taste freedom. Unlike anything that they've seen before, they knew they had to escape from Da Nang. They knew that if they'd stayed there, they would be one of the 5 million that were probably put in the onion field. Not very long ago, about maybe 2.5 months ago, I was riding with Judge Paula Patrick, who was running for Supreme Court at that time. There was another gentleman that was with us. His name was David Lanahan. And as I was telling my story about what happened in 1975, David began to pause. He says, wait a minute. As I was telling my story, he says, I was, and he was very, reluctant to share it, but he said, I was put up for adoption when I was a little baby. I was, 6 or 7 months old. And he says, I was given to this lady by my parents who took me from Vietnam. And he says, this is very touching. He says, I was on that boat that came out of Vietnam. And we went to the Philippines. And he says, that was one of the greatest days of my life because he was a small kid. And today he's a very successful, 40-some-plus-year-old guy who's doing extremely well in the hotel and hospitality industry. But it shows you how God can put people in places. And he is the author of all freedoms. And David is a good man. He's a friend today. And I have nothing but the utmost of respect for David for even stepping up and saying, here's my background. So when you talk about people who have so much discourse to say about what's happening in America, when you go to other countries and you've had a chance to visit them like you and I have, and you stop and see what they're going through in their own countries or what they've been through in their own countries and how they have dictators and how they have political structures that has no real relevance. It's just on paper, because you definitely have a caste system. You have people who are very wealthy or rich and affluent and have access to all the other things, and you have people who live in sheer dirt poverty. I believe right now, Matt, that we have to have a plan in place to address those mindsets. We need to educate more and more people about what it takes to build the American dream once again. In my plan as a lieutenant governor, I plan to do 3 things. Have an economic policy, educational policies, and a poverty program that brings people up out by the bootstraps to get them reconnected so that they have hope and visions for the American dream once again. That's possible. You know, Bible says all things are possible for he that believe. Okay? I've been a believer for many, many years, and I'm not going to change any of that. Because if you knew where I came from, you'd understand why I think that there's hope for our country. There's hope for every person in our society. But we have to go back to the basics, yes. We have to learn how to love one another once again. And we have to go back into our churches, which is some of the most segregated places in America right now on a Sunday. My church is about 13,000 strong. And it's a big church. But by the same token, we talk about the love of Christ and why so many other processes that are happening in our country is not working for us. And we've touched bases on that already, the CRT programs. That's not going to work for Christians. There's no way in the world Christians should be able to entertain that kind of thought right now to begin with. It goes completely against their moral values. And if you lose your moral compass, you may as well go in and live under some form of a dictator. We had Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania who made the decision to dictate how we were to be controlled in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, that hurt us, even during the course of the pandemic. There's some controversial matters right now with the pandemic that says, you know, whether this coronavirus was real or whether it was man-made, whether it was, all I can say is that we were on lockdown for 15 months, and this governor was the culprit behind that. More than 33% of businesses in Pennsylvania have closed as a result of that. 33% will never reopen again. We've had so many people who have lost their jobs, and many of them don't want to go back to work because we're incentivizing them to stay home, and we're doing more harm to taxpayers by saying, okay, we're going to give these folks X amount of dollars to stay home, and we're going to tax you guys who are out there working your butts off still so that you can pay these guys to stay home. My economic policies changes all of that. We're not going to do that. We're going to incentivize people to get up off their butt and go back to work. We're going to encourage entrepreneurship as we've not seen it before. I have so many international contacts who are waiting on Lieutenant Governor James Jones to walk into office. And here's why. In my breadth of reach and in the petroleum sector, I run across a lot of people who are willing to do business across country lines. But we cannot drop our guard and say that we are going to we're going to suspend permits for oil drilling. We're going to eliminate jobs like the XL pipeline. We can't do that. We're going to put a perimeter around the Dakota access line and stop that from happening. We at one time were considered a world power, that we were energy independent. I'd love to be able to maintain that once again. So what a Lieutenant Governor James Jones will do, I'll bring all these people back to America from other countries so that they will want to work with us, and that to create the American dream once again for people who've been down and out and downtrodden, because we can put programs to help lift them up and not push them down, or not just simply say, here are you some fish. We want you to continue to eat government fish. No, you eat the government fish until you're able to sustain your own self and go out there and fish for yourself. We can do that once again. But it's going to take more than James Jones. It's going to take a cadre of people who are similarly focused as a servant leader. As you said earlier, Matt, great words, servant leaders. You know, we all have a responsibility in service to God. God is our Father. We have a leadership role to just stand where you are. Just start doing something where you are right now. And do the very best you can at being a good citizen. Helping out neighbors, inspiring people to reach their goals, teaching them not to quit. You know, we all have certain goals that we want to accomplish. And the American dream is something that is embraceable, but you can't get it when you have a government that says, I'm going to give you money to stay home. And a government that says, I'm going to force these employers to pay you $15 an hour. We've just been on lockdown for 15 months. Why do you want to force employers to pay $15 an hour just to get people to come to work again. That's unfair and unfortunate. So maybe I have a tremendous amount of ideas that only a small group of people believe, but I think there's a lot more people who need to hear this message, a message of hope, and it's a time to shine. I use that pretty regularly because I believe that, we have been dull for the last several months. We were coming strong. I mean, we had gross national products that was looking really, really good for us as a nation. And I think that we can be able to recover that once again. The only way that's going to happen is if you have the right leadership and if you have the right followership.
I think one of the cool things that I always knew it, but I never really gave the value or appreciation for the level of power and control that a state government has.
Yes.
I ran as a write-in candidate for state rep in the 146th after my small business that I had owned for 11 years was closed by the governor's edicts. 2 weeks before the primaries in June of 2020, I had announced a 2-week Facebook campaign, and I took 25% of the Republican vote and 10% of the Democrat vote as a write-in candidate with only 2 weeks of preparation. I tried to get the Republican to step down, that was the endorsed candidate, in order for me to take the ballot. Didn't work, so I backed him. And I do believe that he won, even though he lost, according to the results. That he was up by 5,000 votes at midnight, and then all of a sudden was down 10,000 votes. So there was a 15,000 vote swing that magically happened in the middle of the night. But that's neither here nor there. But I do believe, having gone through that process and seeing how the government works at the state level and seeing the dictatorial power of our governor, who, by the way, is still impacting us today. I went this morning, I need back surgery. And I went this morning for my initial consultation at Rothman. I'm diagnosed PTSD from the Gulf War, from where I have to wear a gas mask for as long as we did. And I can't wear anything on my face without feeling like I'm being suffocated, including a mask, which I didn't really recognize until I was forced to have to wear a mask by mandate. So I went to my appointment this morning and I didn't have a mask, and they refused to serve me because I wasn't wearing a mask, and I refused to wear a mask, but I offered to wear a face shield, and they said that wasn't good enough, and was denied service by Rothman, which is disappointing, being that, if they're all vaccinated and all wearing masks, then they aren't at risk. And if I'm one not wearing the mask, then I'm the one at risk. So why is there a conflict? I'm not quite sure, but their imaginary fears trumped my real trauma. And I tried to explain to them what would happen if I had to wear a mask, and they didn't seem to care. But at the state level, you see that power, you see that overreach, that control, and how quickly you can go from a free society to an imprisoned society without even knowing you're in prison. There may not have been walls around us, there may not have been guards and chain link fence and barbed wire, but we were in a prison for 15 months. I think there's a shift happening, and I wanted to get your take on this. And I had predicted this a year ago, that when this whole election fraud conversation came up, and all the conspiracy theorists were out and having their conversations about what was going to happen, and would Trump stay in office, would there be all these things, that these shifts and maneuvers. What I always said was, at some point in time, the sovereignty of the states will become the overriding deciding factor as to what happens to our country. Mm-hmm. And I read a letter from the Attorney General of Arizona yesterday that he had sent to the Attorney General of the United States, who had clearly stated, the Attorney General of the United States had stated that he was going to essentially control the outcomes of these individual audits within these states. And the letter from the Attorney General of Arizona basically stated in part that, reminding the Attorney General of the United States that it was the 13 states that created the United States federal government, not the other way around. Right. And the sovereignty of each state is going to be the deciding factor of the direction of our country. And there are 30 conservative controlled legislatures in the United States, 30 states. And I believe Arizona is going to be Florida, I believe, was the first with Governor DeSantis and the things that he was doing to ban CRT, to ban passports, vaccine passports, all the things he's doing. But I think with the audit and the election, and whatever the outcome is, and listen, I'm not against fair play.
Mhm.
If somebody wins fairly, and Joe Biden won fairly, then Joe Biden's the president. I'll give him all the respect that he deserves. But until I know that for sure, I want there to be some transparency. I want there to be an investigation. I want there to be people who are uncovering the truth, and whatever that truth may be, I accept. But that effort needs to be allowed to happen. So what I'm seeing in Arizona with these audits, and whatever that result is going to be, I believe is going to be the first card in the house of cards that is going to fall. And the states that you're starting to see when they signed that, and I don't know if you remember during the part of the Electoral College being approved on the 6th of January, there was 18 states that had signed states attorney generals that had signed a letter to Congress stating that they wanted to have audits done in their states before the Electoral College was approved. I think that was a precursor to what we're seeing now.
Mhm.
And we're going to start seeing individual states saying, you know what, no more. The overreach of the federal government, no more. And if you live in a state like Arizona or Florida or Texas or whatever state is going to have the stand up and draw that line in the sand, that's probably a good place to live. And what I think I call it the People's Republic of Pennsylvania, are currently living in is a state where we don't have that. And what we need is someone who has the ability to draw that line in the sand. Someone who has the Constitution as their framework for their decision making, and the heart and moral compass of a Christian, who make decisions on behalf of its people that will benefit them based on the construct of our country from 245 years ago, where 13 states said no more.
That's right.
And I think what you're doing and the role that you could potentially play in the outcome of the future of Pennsylvania is monumental. This isn't any other year, my friend. You're in a monumental opportunity to directly change the course of the state of Pennsylvania in such an epic fashion. And people don't recognize that. And there's people in the legislature who are just puppets on both sides of the aisle. Listen, I'm as equally hard on conservatives, or I should say Republicans, as I am Democrats. I want you to do your job.
That's right.
I elected you to do your job. You work for me, the citizen. And I came up with this the other day in my head, and I'm like, we use the term patriots now, just like we use frontline, just like we use, like everything's changed. Like the definition of hero changed and now became victim, right? There's like this up is down, down is up, black is white, in is out, whatever. Everything's the opposites, right? But what is a patriot in the real world? What does that mean? It's somebody who is willing to be a servant leader and stand up for the people who cannot.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody's a patriot. There are citizens who are just here. They're present, right? And there's nothing wrong. Be a citizen. But all I ask is be an informed citizen.
Right.
But then there are James Joneses of the world who are patriots, who have served at every level for every adult year of their life. And I thank you for being a patriot, not just a citizen. And thank you for educating people, for making the citizen an informed citizenry, so that they can make the proper choice for who to lead them and be their voice. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Matt. You, your voice, your podcast, you are echoing around the globe. And I pray that the success of not only this podcast, but this interview go an even greater distance around the world. People need to understand that we have a responsibility, and we have to have a clear-eyed approach to what's happening around us. Christians, Muslims, Catholics, open up your eyes wherever you may be. Democrats, independents, Republicans, open up your eyes and realize that we are a small people on God's earth. And we have to be able to live in this place called the world for a short period of time. We got dashes. I love when you talk about your podcast, between the two dashes. We're only going to be here for so long. And then we're gone. What have we done for mankind? What have we done for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, or the generations to come? Are we going to teach them that you should not love one another? Because children come to a place when they're in school, they're growing up, they don't see color. Children see one another. They see love. They see this person is cool or that person is not cool. They don't get into that color thing. But that color thing, that racial thing, that tension that evolves, it comes from outside influences. And we need to be very astute with how we teach our children about loving one another. I feel sorry for many of the single parents. My heart goes out to them. When you're having to raise 2 or 3 children alone without the guidance of a man in a household. I mean, God said, hey, we're here to reproduce. That's what he created us for. So I'm a firm believer of a traditional marriage. And when you have a man that is in a household, it makes a big difference. Whether he is a godly man or an ungodly man, but the man's presence makes a difference with how people set the stage to get along and resolve conflicts, even within a home. Even within a home. I came from a family where my mom and dad stayed together until my dad died. My mom never remarried again because she said, I couldn't see having a man replace my husband over these children that I do have. So she said, I'm not going to do that. I mean, yes, she dated somebody, but she never got remarried again. And I see the women of the world today, many in our own Commonwealth. And I get out, I've been involved with a number of different community projects. I sit on some boards at different tech schools. And I've been to North Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, Southeast Philadelphia, all over, to see how people are suffering. People need to have something to look up to. And a single parent is not that successful at doing what we're talking about. It takes 2 to be able to create an investment empire, but it can be done. You're just going to have a strong-willed mother who's going to be able to hold her child to a higher standard of excellence, and that the community is going to have to come in and help that mother to raise those children. We need to go back to the basics. Love one another as Christ so loved the church. We have to be able to go back to basics, Matt. If we don't go back to basics, we may as well just get all raptured up out of here. And that day is going to come too soon. But I just hope that we're all prepared for that day. We're looking at wars and rumors of wars that are taking place right now across the global community. And we have a president that's not very strong when it comes to defending our rights as citizens of America. He's talking about having a meeting with President Vladimir Putin, and I've done business with the Russians, and they're tough folks to deal with. There are a lot of holdouts over there in Russia from the old KGB era. And we have been hit by, 2016, they said there were Russian influences over the political thing. And 2020, something happened because we did not have a fair and equitable election. But we have a president who's creating more divisiveness in our country that's bringing us together. We have to stop that. He has to be able to understand his role in leadership, even if God put him there as a leader, whether a good leader or a bad leader. Even if God put him there as a leader, he can be removed as a leader. And I'm not saying I wish anything ill come on him, but I pray for the man every single day. I pray for him. I just know how he slipped and fell 4 times, 5 times going up the steps on the Air Force One. I know that just this week he was at the G7 summit and he misspoke about introducing the president of South Africa. And folks there began to kind of laugh at him. I take that as a serious offense because I don't want our president to be a laughing stock of a global community. And I know that we all are going to be older as days go by, and maybe age has something to do with his decisions. But I just hope and pray that we can be able to support each and every state, like a Florida, like a Texas, like an Arizona, places that are very strong with conservative leadership, even if we don't have conservative leadership at the United States presidential office. And I think we have to be able to do that to protect. It's not being a protectionist, but it says that we have to do the right thing to help people in our own communities. How do we affect the global community? Well, I think we just simply have to shore up our own walls to make us stronger, spiritually, mentally, financially, and to keep people informed. I try to surround myself with people who are informed. And I find conservatives, and as you mentioned earlier about patriots are very informed with what's going on. They don't just take CNN or MSNBC or even Fox News as to be their only source of information that they help to make decisions. It's about reading, it's about staying informed, and it's about helping other folks to understand the vision that God has given to you or the articulation of a point, and that you keep the narrative focused on what is right and not taking right, making it wrong, and taking wrong and making it right. That's never going to work. It's never going to work.
I love the fact you brought up having a male force within the home, and having grown up without a dad for the first 12 years of my life, but having a mother who worked 3 jobs. She worked 16, 20 hours a day. I understood how sacrifice looked, what sacrifice looked like. I understood what hard work was. I understood that there were responsibilities that I had over my brother when she was at work. Even though he was my older brother, I was the older brother by proxy.
Yes.
But I had strong male influences in my life who may not have been my father.
Mm-hmm.
They were an uncle.
Mm-hmm.
They were my godfather. They were people that my mom, smart enough, my mom was a retired English teacher. My mom is an intelligent woman, and she was smart enough to understand that strong male influences were going to be required for her boys to be okay.
Yes.
And she put those people in my life as placeholders for my stepdad when he finally came into the picture. And it is imperative, and as a cop, I see this every day. 99% of the world's problems can be traced back to some shitty parenting.
Yes.
Right? That's just reality. There's no, and that's not, it may not be politically correct to say that.
Yeah.
But the reality is that most problems, and I can tell you after 28 years of doing this, when there isn't a man in the home, you see a lot of common problems within all of those situations. And then when you have a situation where there's domestic violence or drugs or whatever the external influence is within the home, that can cause chaos and disrupt that growth structure within a child's life. I think there has to be, and maybe this is something I can help you with down the road when you become lieutenant governor, is coming up with programs that help create that male influential process in the home, whether it's through male mentorship programs. I've been mentoring kids for 30 years, and a lot of the kids I mentor are coming from homes where they don't have a male influence. And I see the value that brings to them. not just because I believe I'm good at what I do, but because I see the end results. I see the college degrees. I see the going into private business. I see now they have kids. I mean, that's 30 years I've been doing this. So I see they now have kids that are now graduating high school, and I mentored their parents, so it's very weird for me to see this process come to full circle. And I think as a society, and this isn't a black or white thing, this is a father or no father thing, or a male influence or no male influence thing. And if a James Jones and a Matt Cubbler can become who we are through all of our life's journeys and our struggles and the things we've had to overcome, then anybody can. There isn't a ceiling based on your circumstance. It's simply a matter of you figuring it out on your own through your experiences in life, or having a guide, someone that can help you see and identify how to handle those obstacles and overcome them. And I think that's something that I'm sure you'll bring to the table when you are elected. And I want to make public here, I will support you and work with you in any way, shape, or form that you would need me to in your quest to become the lieutenant governor. That's how much I strongly believe in what you're doing. We've only met once, and I met Paula Patrick when at the same event that we were at. She deserves a spot on the state Supreme Court. She's earned that. Kathy Barnett has earned the right to sit at the table as a U.S. Senator or House of Representatives. And they're all people of color. And this isn't, when I want people to recognize this moment here, white cop, black guy running for lieutenant governor. The common thread is that we're both Christians.
Yes.
We're both men, and we're both conservatives.
Amen.
And it doesn't matter what color we are, because we see each other for who we are. And that's men, Christians, and conservatives.
Amen. Amen. Well said. Well said.
The world just needs to get there. We've got to get past the noise. And we've got to turn off the TV. We've got to open up a book.
Yes.
We've got to expand our minds. And we have to have meaningful dialogue that doesn't require yelling, name calling, or rehashing things that neither one of us ever did,
right,
or caused, or created.
That's right.
And I am a studier of history. My goal in life is to help history not repeat itself.
Right. Right.
And I get very frustrated when I see the same processes happening and the same results happening. And that's called insanity, when you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And I have to figure out a way. And I believe this podcasting has been very helpful for me with that, in communicating with as many people as I possibly can those things, that it's literally not about anything other than seeing us for who we are as individuals, respecting one another, being grateful for the life that we've been given by God, and the fact that we were born into the greatest country ever created.
Amen.
And those are things that we have to hold true and have value for, because otherwise we're always just going to be unhappy. We're always going to be searching for what could be versus what is. And if we can't manage what is, then what could be has no value.
Right.
And I just want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for inspiring me today. Because I didn't tell you this in the beginning, my background's in human behavior and body language.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do shows, I'm always reading body language. I'm trying to determine whether there's authenticity between the words that are coming out of the mouths and the way that their body language is and how their facial expressions match. And you are one of the most authentic people I've ever met in my life. And that's very difficult to do and be a politician, because they set the bar so low that anybody who exceeds that bar is automatically deemed to be a threat or not authentic. Like it becomes the bar's so low and they're supposedly the best. And when somebody who's really, really honest and authentic and has all these great ideas and wants to do good work comes and crushes that bar, all of a sudden they're the ones that are the enemy.
Right. True.
So I'm here to support you
Thank
in
you.
any way that you need me and my talents and my abilities. I want everyone that listens to the 2 Dates and Dash podcast to go to, what's your website again? Just I don't know, I can read it over your shoulder, but
That's
the
okay.
beginning's a little bit out.
That's all right. It's www.jones4ltgovernorpa.com.
And there's all the information where they can learn about you, how to support you, the event you're going to be at.
Absolutely. And you'll find a great pictorial history there with some of the folks that we all have recognized who have been in office and out of office. But it's a great story that you just look at some of the information. If people want to volunteer, they can help. I would love to have you, since this is a statewide opportunity. I want to be able to have anybody who's ready, willing, and able-bodied to help knock on doors, set up meet and greets, to open up their hearts and souls and minds to a new idea that Jones for Lieutenant Governor is the right way to go. He's a Frederick Douglass conservative and God-fearing man that we need to get in office to help do whatever is necessary that God has planned for us.
Well, my friend, I'm truly thankful and blessed that you were on my show today. God put us together.
Amen.
And I'm a firm believer that life is not about a series of individual moments. It's a connection of moments that is a train of life for where you are today, and everything you've done before is that connecting component to it. And every person you meet has a value. And we wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for a patriotic movement trying to save America and trying to save the state of Pennsylvania. So I thank you. Thank you for your service to this country. And I thank you for your future service to the state of Pennsylvania, because I know you will win the lieutenant governorship in the state of Pennsylvania. Hang tight. We're going to talk off air. Everybody, thank you. Thank you for listening to this very important episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. Thank you to my good friend, James Jones, who will be the next lieutenant governor in the state of Pennsylvania. And if you have any questions, please go to his website, jones4lieutenantgovernorpa.com. And I'm really thankful that we had a chance to have this very meaningful conversation. And everybody, just remember, lean into love and go out and be kind to one another.